another. Thank you so much for faithfully caring and praying for one another. Proverbs 17, we will look at the first 5 verses, Lord willing, tonight. And I've entitled this particular message, Prioritizing What is Right. Prioritizing what is right. Obviously, in the book of Proverbs, there are repetitive themes and topics, and we'll see some of that. But I want us to consider Proverbs 17 and verse 1 as we begin. Better is a dry morsel and quietness therewith than an house full of sacrifices with strife. Sometimes that word sacrifices is translated feasting. And the reason for that is because the times of sacrifices were often accompanied with feasts or festivals. So the point is, where there is a lot of food, where there is a lot of provision, where there is a lot of feasting, and what would at least outwardly appear to be kind of a party or a time of great festivity and enjoyment, that sometimes gives the impression that everything is well and good. And we see that in our culture a lot. We see a lot of partying, and America can throw a bash. America can have a party like no other, it seems like. And at times, I don't even like to make reference to certain events, but there are times where people will spend thousands and millions and sometimes wait for hours just to get entrance to certain events, and on it goes. But often, not only is there sin and debauchery that goes on at those events, but many of the people that are there are very unhappy deep down inside. They're looking at the party and all the festivities as an escape, a coping mechanism. So in Proverbs 17 and verse 1, he is saying, by the inspiration of God, Solomon writes, it is better to have just a little bit, okay? And this is the first point in the outline tonight. And if you have the prayer bulletin, I did try to include the 5 main points or principles. But the first one is right living, the dry morsel that appears to be a sign of lack of success, of lack of prosperity, of discouragement and depression, of emptiness. It's actually the other way around, because it is better to have a dry morsel, like a crust of bread that seems to be little, better to have a little and quietness therewith, have peace, the peace of God, right relationships, order in the home, than a house full of sacrifices, feasting, festivities, outwardly looking so fun and exciting and successful and joyous, and yet there is strife, there is discord, there is unhappiness and a lack of satisfaction and discontentment and broken relationships. So, right living, we can refer to right living in the sense of wisdom, the wisdom of God, which of course is a major theme, if not the primary theme throughout the entire book of Proverbs. So we could refer to right living as wisdom, the wisdom of God, righteousness, godliness. That is to be prioritized over luxury. But we often find it the other way around. People are pursuing luxury, getting more, bigger, better. I just heard the other day someone say, if I quote it right, I'm not sure I'm going to get the quote just exactly right, but property ownership, you're never satisfied because you always want the piece of property right next to yours, even if you already have a lot. It's like what maybe Rockefeller said, I just need another dollar more. He had so much, probably the wealthiest, the richest man alive at the time. Now we would compare him in today's world to someone maybe like an Elon Musk. And I think it was Rockefeller who said, I just want another dollar more. There's that desire for even something else that somebody else has. The rich young ruler, Jesus called him out for his covetousness. So right living, though, righteousness, godliness, the wisdom of God, that is to be the priority, not luxury. The Expositor's Bible Commentary Encyclopedia Poverty with peace is better than prosperity with strife. I have seen and met, and I have known, particularly in the world of entertainment, and we can go through many examples of this, but some of the what appear to be most successful, they have fame, they have fortune, they have what it seems everybody is trying to get to, the whole keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with the Kardashians, and yet their lives are full of misery and strife and broken relationships. And then many times we find them in the headlines with various scandals and in courts of law, and the dregs of their life are being put on display, and we find out that those years where it seemed like they had it all and they were at the top of the peak of fame, and yet in the whole time that they are rising to the top, their lives are just full of sins and wickedness. And even if it's not eventually a scandalous headline of illegal practices, many times there's broken relationships, various husbands and ex-wives and girlfriends and various other things. And then we see cabinet members going before Congress for congressional hearings to go before the Senate for a vote for confirmation, and they're digging into their life. We see this with candidates in the news, and people are going in now with the internet, and it's incredible. It's incredible. I'm not trying to pick on Chandler too much, but he's going through a process right now with something, and the way in which the DNR is checking him out. I've been fascinated by the process, and all of us in the family have been receiving interviews, and you see this and you think, okay, it matters how we live. I'm thankful that there is still a standard of some kind left in this world, but even the world recognizes certain standards of character and integrity and honesty, though we see failures of that in so many areas. But I see some of these politicians, and they go through these confirmation hearings, and they're digging into their lives, and they're digging up all kinds of things, and we're finding out even through some of these DNA testing kits that people have sons and daughters from relationships that they've tried to hide. I mean, and Proverbs is clear. God is clear in his word. It's not about luxury. It's better to live right, to be godly, to live by the wisdom of God, to live a life of righteousness, than it is to have everything that money can buy and that the world has to offer. Better is a dry morsel and quietness therewith than a house full of sacrifices with strife. Again, I come back to this, but how many times do we see successful men in the world's eyes, and they have tarnished their home and their lives with immoral relationships and adulterous affairs, and they've been horrible fathers and husbands. Oh, they're at the pinnacle of success. They have high achievements in a lot of areas, from sports to politics to entertainment, and yet where should they be the most successful? In God's eyes, or in the world of entertainment, money, politics? It should be in God's eyes, right? We talked about this Sunday afternoon with Daniel. Daniel walks into a room having been an 81-year-old man now, left out, and Belshazzar's been seeking all of these soothsayers and magicians and all these wicked astrologers, and Daniel's left out, and he walks in the night that Belshazzar's going to die as the Medes and the Persians invade. Literally, as they're talking, the Medes and the Persians are engineering a way to stop the river Euphrates so that the Medo-Persian Empire can go underneath the wall and get into Babylon. Who was the most successful man in that room that night? In the world's eyes, Belshazzar and all the luxuries of Babylon. In the world's eyes, there's a lot of people I can name right now that the world would say are very successful and have a lot of money and fame and women and on and on. God measures man by a totally different standard. The greatest man in that room that night was Daniel, by the grace of God. And that's the principle here. You think Solomon learned this? even later in his life, the hard way. Kingdom going away from him, and we talked about this in Ecclesiastes, where Solomon at the end of his life is looking back with a measure of regret. So abundance often brings a deterioration of ethics and morality. If envy and jealousy increase and the virtues of contentment and gratefulness are not cultivated. We hear the term spoiled brats, first world problems. Many times our ungrateful, discontented heart reveals where our trust really lies, where our priorities really are. And how often does envy and jealousy increase among those who have the most, and they're discontented, unthankful, and now we live in a society of critical theory, and it's all about being the victim and stacking victim status on top of victim status on top of victim status. So whoever is the greatest victim has the most moral authority. And we can get into all that, and I won't go into that anymore. But sadly, we live in a decadent society where it's not just the decadence of the immorality and all that comes with that, but the decadence of wealth that leaves us with idols of the heart that are made of dollar bills and money and crypto and investments. And not that those things in and of themselves are wrong, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So we have to guard our hearts. How many times does God check us with a particular financial setback? And it reminds us that this world is not my home. My trust cannot be in riches. That ultimately we trust God to provide for our needs. And can we say that we are content with what things that God has given us? Can we say that? And are we grateful? I've had a reminder even recently in my own life. And the reminder and the lesson that it is in our own family. And riches take wings and fly away, don't they? Real quick. And so we have to trust the Lord. And it's hard. It tests us sometimes. But we have to remember that our contentment, our satisfaction, our joy, our peace is found in the Lord. So we also see in verse 2, a wise servant shall have rule over a son that causeth shame, and shall have part of the inheritance among the brethren. So we see wisdom is more honorable than privilege. So in prioritizing what is right, there again is the right living, the righteousness, the wisdom of God, godliness. Godliness with contentment is great gain, but we see wisdom is more honorable than privilege. Who's the example here in verse 2? We have a son and we have a wise servant. By the end of verse 2, who is receiving more honor? The servant or the son? The servant. Now, in first century Eastern culture, there is no way a servant can go from the bottom rung of the class of society to the place of inheritance. Something dreadfully had to happen in that son's life for him to lose his inheritance, and something really good had to be in the life of the servant for him to rise into that place of sonship, right? So this is the son who had privilege. This is similar to the parable of the prodigal son. Now, you have the son who's at home with the father, and he's actually full of pride, while the prodigal spends his inheritance in riotous living, but he repents. The father welcomes him home, and instead we have a privileged son who's actually the unrepentant one. And here is a son who has disgraced himself in some way. Wrong choices, wasting his inheritance, whatever the case may be, and he's brought shame. But the servant who was faithful, who lived with integrity and honesty, he ends up rising to the place of the inheritant, the son's inheritance, to the place of the son, and receiving the honor and the inheritance. So We don't always see that type of advancement this side of heaven, but is God keeping an account? And where is that ultimate honor and reward going to take place? In heaven, before God, at the judgment seat. So even if it doesn't happen fully, the point still is, should we live lives of honesty and integrity and trustworthiness? Should we do right on our job, even if the rest of the employees are being brats and being lazy and being dishonest? We still do what's right. We still honor and obey. Do we do this on the ball team? Do we do this in the classroom, at school, on the job? Do we still, when we see a society that cheats and cuts corners and lies and backstabs and cuts throats, do we still honor the Lord, live faithfully? Do we still obey even when it's hard, trust the Lord? So we see God rewarding where there is integrity, where there's honesty, when there's faithfulness and obedience to his word. And then in verse 3, the fining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord trieth the hearts. God knows our heart. Metal, stone, did it need to have a fire, a refining fire? Yeah. We have all kinds of technology today to make this so much more efficient. But we have the technology that maybe makes it a little bit or a lot easier, and it's in some factory somewhere and we hardly see. Does anybody enjoy watching some of those how things were made documentaries? I like documentaries. I really enjoy. I was watching a shark documentary the other day, and I just get fascinated with certain things like that. But sometimes those shows, those documentaries, where how things were made, or is it Mike Rowe, The Dirty Jobs, and he goes into those really disgusting places, and you get a new appreciation for bridges and various dirty work that gets done that we just take for granted. Well, you know, in Bible times, the refining of metals and stone was a dirty and often very dangerous process. Didn't have OSHA regulations and all the safety features, but as hard and as difficult and as dangerous as that project could be, that refining process, what is the example? What is the illustration for? What's the imagery for? Because we have a lot of refining in our lives, don't we? There's a lot of dross that needs to be consumed, that needs to be burned off. God knows. God sees our hearts. God knows. And we don't like the refining process. I know I don't. But it's so necessary, and we have to submit, we have to trust and let God do his work. And at the same time, as we think of it as a negative, we also have to think of it as a positive. God is making us into his image. He knows our heart. There's a positive part to that, and there's a negative. God rewards. God sees. God knows when we've done right and nobody else sees it. Nobody else acknowledges it. God also knows from the standpoint of when we think we've gotten away with something and we're not going to be held accountable. God knows. So all of that is bound up in that verse. And then finally, tonight, in the few minutes that we have left, I want us to look at verse 4. A wicked doer giveth heed to false lips, and a liar giveth ear to a naughty tongue. This goes back and forth. This is a malicious and dishonest person with his words, her words, but it's also the person that is attracted to that. So it's both. It's the character of both that are being held into account here. What is it that attracts us to the malicious and the dishonest? I go to the social media world. I go to the internet. And it seems like people are making so much money on this, and they attract likes and subscribers and followers. And I think even in the entertainment world, in the music world, is this what we're filling our minds with? Is this what we're most attracted to? To the malicious and to the dishonest, to the vulgar, to the carnal? Leviticus 19. I know we are not followers of the ceremonial law, but the moral law is still very applicable. The principles of the moral law are out of the character of God himself, and they apply. Though we're not offering sacrifices and going through a priesthood in the form of the Mosaic law, there is the moral law in Leviticus 19 in verse 11. Ye shall not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie to one another. And ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. Thou shalt not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shalt fear thy God. I am the Lord. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. That's false witness. I am the Lord. Verse 17 of Leviticus 19. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Ye shall keep my statutes. And then he goes on, and there's more of the law there. It's very clear how we should treat others and what we should be attracted to. Flypaper attracts flies. Is the flypaper good for the flies? But so often we see the carnal heart attracted to that which is carnal. What is speaking to our hearts? Is it the truth? Are we walking in the light? Are we looking for the light? Are we in the lamp and the light of God's word, which is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path? Or are we more attracted to the maliciousness and the dishonesty? Proverbs 10 in verse number 18. Proverbs 10 in verse number 18. He that hideth hatred with lying lips, and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. Chapter 12 in verse 22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight. Proverbs 13 in verse 5. A righteous man hateth lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and cometh to shame. And then Proverbs 26 and verse 28. Proverbs 26 and verse 28. A lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin. I used to take that verse and I would deal with students as they would be caught in lies, and I would say, you just said that you hated me. What? I'd go to Proverbs 26 and verse 28, and I'd say, but the Bible says a lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it. You just expressed hatred toward me, toward your classmate, toward your mom, your dad, your teacher. Lying express a disdain for the relationship. It's a form of hatred. That should not be characteristic of our life. We'll have to quickly just make this last point, last principle. Mocking or exploiting the misfortune of others will result in one's own punishment. Verse 5 of Proverbs 17, and we'll have to quickly finish this up. Whoso mocketh the poor reproacheth his maker, and he that is glad at calamity shall not be unpunished. Whether their lack of resources is due to their sin, the sin of others, or circumstances beyond their control, like a natural disaster, we must not mock and take advantage of the poor, of those who are in misfortune. How many times do we see roofing companies come in during natural disasters and exploit the people who just had damage? How many times do we see these false take advantage of elderly people on fixed incomes? In the whole Nancy Guthrie, Savannah Guthrie case out there in Arizona, and false ransom notes. People exploiting, take advantage of those who are hurting, those who are poor. I think much of the politics today is exploiting the poor and the disadvantaged more than it is helping. They claim to be often helping the poor, but I find that many of their practices and what they teach as far as principles and policies aren't really helping. It's exploiting. It's taking advantage of people for one's political fortunes. We have to remember, if not for the grace of God, so go I. I think it's important that we remember that we be humbled. And then I just quickly want to put this up, and we'll have to wrap this up, but the Fraser Institute in 2019, it's a really good article. You can find it online. We won't have time to read through a couple of the paragraphs, but They go through and they go into deep study on the causes of poverty. And it's interesting, the 4 primary causes of poverty. The first one, lack of a father in the home. Does the Bible speak to that? Number 2, failure to earn a high school diploma. Does the Bible speak to education, to knowledge, to learning? I know that's a government mandated thing, and why don't you just quit when you're in 8th grade? No, there's people who are smarter than us at some point said we need to give our kids an education at least up to 12th grade, age 17 or 18, because that might help them get a little bit better, make better decisions, be a little bit more prepared for the workplace, be a little bit more mature. It wasn't just some angry people up there waiting to torture children that came up with this, okay? Now, our educational system needs a lot of repair and a lot of rehab and a lot of work, okay? There are some good educational institutions, but who's the primary one responsible for the education of our children? The parents, whether that be homeschool, public school, or Christian school. And I've been on the side of a school administrator where everybody just thought, oh, you're supposed to raise my kids. Me? I'm busy trying to raise 4 of my own. I can't raise 200 kids in the Christian school too, be their mommy and their daddy, but you're the bad guy. That's why I put them in the school. You could be the bad guy. We're just there to give them all the things they want. You have to be the bad guy. Okay, all right. How did I get off on that rabbit trail? So 2 biblical principles already, real quickly, a third one that they came up with. It's an interesting study. I wish I had time to read the details. Having a child without being married. Does the Bible speak to that? Flee fornication. Marriage is undefiled. Whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. And then look at the fourth one, a full-time job. And it goes on in the article and talks about just a work ethic. 4 biblical principles, 4 basic principles. And they said that in the article that the rate of poverty among those who meet all 4 of these is 1% or less. Do you think God knew what he was talking about when he put these basic principles in place and commanded them and gave us his word and declared these truths and lived them out through the person and work of Jesus Christ and godly men and women who have obeyed his word? And thankfully, many of us have been influenced by parents and have been taught a good work ethic and did not have children before we got married and we got a high school diploma. Thankfully, many of us have had those kinds of influences, but there's a world out there, many people don't have this. And they need the gospel, and they need education, and they need to be taught these things, and they need the gospel more than anything. But the gospel even addresses these matters because it's the good news of Jesus Christ. So a lot more that could be said. We're out of time. Thank you for your patience. I wanted to at least touch on those principles and those matters that were discovered in research. But thank you for being here tonight. I hope this has been a help and encouragement. Let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for your word. Lord, so practical in ways that, Lord, come out of theological truths that speak to very practical needs in our lives. And help us, Lord, to be faithful to your word and trust you and live lives of character and integrity and to be honest in the sight of God and in the sight of men as we are salt and light and as we share the gospel. Bless, Lord, as we are dismissed. Pray for safety as you travel home and pray for your help and strength throughout the rest of the week. In Jesus' name, amen.